Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday, and it is heel time. So I'm really excited actually to be teaching this. I have to admit, it is the first time I will do a short row heel live. I've done I do a lot of heel flaps live, but I've never done a short row heel live, which is very exciting. So I'm really excited to do that. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about heels first, because there are lots of different types of heels. I'm then going to go through and show you how to do a short row. I'm going to talk about a bit about what they are. We're going to do wrap and turn short rows. There are different types of short row, but that's for another night. So we're going to do wrap and turns. I'm going to show you how to wrap and turn. Then I'm going to skip forward to what I prepared earlier, and I'm going to show you how to pick up those wraps and turns, because they're all the key pieces of turning your heel for this. So very exciting. You're right, Victoria, it is. So I'm going to switch across like I did last time. I'm going to go straight to the camera, and then I'm going to show you how to do a short row heel. Very exciting. I'm going to show you my favorite heel type first, those all. So I'm going to swap across, and I will be back to you in just a second. Right, so we are now swapped across, which is good. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you first, I'm going to talk about the heels generally. So I have two different types of heels. So I have the heel that we have on our sock, and this is a short row. And the reason it's called a short row is that you are only knitting some of your stitches sometimes, so you end up with a longer piece. So they're actually done so you've like shorter rows. So it means you don't work the full row, you work back and forth over a section of the stitches. And that's what causes your heel to turn. And that's what a short row heel is. So I've done a series of short rows. I'm going to show you those in just a second. It's not my favourite wearable heel though. So I would normally do what's called a heel flap. Then I would pick up my gusset having turned my heel. So I would knit down through half the stitches of my sock, a separate flap, and then come around the heel turn at the bottom, pick up my gusset and continue knitting. But it really depends. And a lot of people, and there are loads of different types of heels. So you'll hear people talking about Fish Lips Kiss heel, which is a proprietary heel owned by, I don't know the designer's name. You have afterthought heels where you just keep knitting the whole sock, and then you cut open your sock and you put in your afterthought heel. And there's lots of different heels. This is the one I teach in my main cuff down sock, because I love them. I think they're a great fit for most people. Short row I think is very good if you have a high instep. It varies depending on how your foot is shaped. So that's just a little bit about heels. So you'll see lots of different types of ones. Very funny though, when I was doing the design for this sock, I put a heel flap into the first version to see, because I wanted to teach it. I like to teach a heel flap, and the funny thing is it looked dreadful because it's disproportionate in a decorative sock. So that's why I have a short row heel in this one. It just fits better with the sock that we're doing. So what are we doing tonight? So the first thing, I'm going to come right up here, is we are doing all the way from the heel right down to the end piece. This is the whole bit of the heel, and that's because wrap and turns can take a little bit of describing. I'm going to talk about why I did this first, because this is a kind of thing. This bit actually is one of my own kind of pieces that I like. So the first thing I did when I was doing my heel is I knit the next round. I only knit 45 stitches of the round, and the reason I did that was I wanted this piece of the sock to be on the curve, so it's folded over it. Whereas if I had started at the start of the round, my heel would have ended up here, and this would have been at the side of the sock, which I didn't want. So it's just, you'll see it in some of my patterns where I'm trying to move the join at the back to the back of my sock, and I do that in a lot of different of my patterns as well. And you can also do it in any pattern you want where you're trying to hide it. So I've already knit on here. So again, you'll see that this is my join, and I have knit 3/4 of the stitches around so that I can start my heel. So this is, I've actually got less stitches on this so that I can demonstrate it live because otherwise we might be here a while. So the first thing is that most heels, not all, but most, and the one in this example, is worked on half of the stitches that I cast on. And a lot of socks are like that. So even in a decorative sock where I've done the same method, for my flaps, it's half and half. So you do half in the flap and half in the front of the needle. And in short row heels, it's very often half the stitches that you cast on at the top. So that's even in a wearable sock, which is why I'm about to slip half of my stitches. So I have 40 stitches here rather than 60, so I'm going to slip 20 of them purlwise. So to slip purlwise, you are inserting the tip of your needle into your stitch purlwise. So as if you're going to purl, and then you slide them all along. So I'm going to slide off my 20 stitches, so you're not working them in this case, and there's a reason for that I'll show you in just a sec. In some patterns, both for decorative and worn socks, when I'm using my DPNs as well for this, I'm using them as if they were straight needles. So I slip my marker and I can remove it because the pattern says to take your marker out, and then I'm going to slip another 10 stitches. So you see I'm just slipping them all off. And because I'm talking, I've lost count, so I'll give them a little count. Now, there we go. So that's the first thing that you do in this particular pattern, is you take those stitches, which will now be your heel. You then have these stitches, which you leave alone, and they're called your instep stitches because they run down the front of your instep eventually. So if you were knitting an ordinary sock as well as a decorative sock, you just leave those on your needle, which is one of the reasons I really like a short circular needle, because they can just rest there without being too much of a worry. The next thing I do in this pattern is I knit my contrast colour together with my main colour. And I'm doing that because I want to pull this really tightly, this stitch in really tightly against this stitch, so that there's no gape in the stitch, because something with heels that you sometimes get is little holes at the side. So I'm going to just knit those two stitches together. So this is my first stitch that I slipped, and I'm going to knit those two stitches together. And that is me started on my heel. So I've done that, and that is here you're going to work back and forth. Don't cut your yarn and work the first stitch together, main colour and contrast colour. So let me just join these. I will answer your question in a second, Becky, as soon as I do this, because I'm just gonna get this heel started and then I'll answer your question. So the first thing is, it says knit to 2 stitches before the end of the heel stitches. So these are the heel stitches, so I'm going to knit to 2 stitches before the end. So I'm just going to make sure I'm not knitting with my tail. I'm going to knit across, just regularly knit across to the 2 stitches before the end. It'll come slightly more to the left, so I'm in the middle. So the first thing, then I'm going to knit to 2 stitches before the end. So I have 2 stitches left on my needle here, and then I have the rest of my stitches here. And it says wrap and turn. So wrap and turn means that you wrap the next stitch. So this is the stitch I want to wrap. So in order to do a wrap, when I have a right side facing, I bring my yarn through the needles, I slip the next stitch, then I take my yarn around that stitch and I slip the stitch back to the needle. So I have now wrapped that stitch with my yarn. The turn is where I literally turn the work. And that's what the turn is. So I've turned and my yarn is now ready to purl back. But also you'll see that I haven't knit those 2 stitches. So those stitches remain unworked. And that is part of the short row. So I've actually only knit part of my row. So it's a short row. So that's where the technique gets its name. So I'm now going to purl back. So it says purl to 2 stitches before the end of the heel stitches. So I'm going to purl back to the other side of my heel stitches. So I'm just purling. So this is now where you're working flat. So we're going from working in the round to working back and forth. So now I'm going to purl my rows because I want to keep a stocking stitch appearance. So I have my 1 stitch here where I knit 2 together, and there's my other stitch. So I need to work another 3 stitches. So I'm here beside my 3 stitches. So I'm now on the purl side, so it's slightly different. So you'll remember on the other side I took my yarn through the needles, but actually it's already through the needles here because it's on the purl side. So I slip my stitch. So that's my 2 stitches before, my wrap and turn stitch, my next stitch. I take my yarn back through the needles, well actually in this case through the needles. I then slip the stitch and then I turn. Now the one difference as well is that my yarn is on this side. When I've wrapped it with from the purl side, I then take it back through the needles and I'm ready to knit my next row. So then I knit back, and again it says working in stocking stitch, work to one stitch before the wrapped turn, the first wrapped stitch, and wrap and turn. So that means that I'm just going to knit. So this is my wrap and turn here, and I want to knit to one stitch before that wrap stitch. So it's this stitch. So I need to knit to before this stitch. So I'm going to knit across to it. I'm going to stop that tapping noise as well. So I keep going all the way across to one stitch before my last wrap stitch, and then I wrap and turn that stitch. So it's wrap and turn at this point. So I bring my yarn through my needles, slip my stitch, bring my yarn back round, slip it back, and then I turn. And now I'm ready to work the other way. So I'm going to purl back, and it says working in stocking stitch, so I know no need to purl because I'm on my purl side, and I purl to one stitch before the last wrap stitch. And that is how you do a short row. So those are wrap and turn short rows. Now I'm going to just work that last purl one again so that you can see an additional purl short row, and I'm going to pause briefly then and have a wee look at the questions, and then I'm going to show you one I did earlier. So I have my one stitch, you need to pull that in every now and again, my wrap stitch, and my one stitch before my wrap stitch. So I worked the last stitch there. Then I have my stitch that needs to be worked, wrapped. So I don't, because my yarn is on this side, I don't need to bring it through the needles. I slip my stitch, I bring it round, and I slip it back, and then I turn. And then I bring it back through, ready to knit. So I'm actually going to talk about a couple of things here now. So I'm doing my short rows, and actually you can already see how I've knit more stitches here than I have here, which is why your short rows create that particular effect. So let me just have a quick, when doing this, oh, so if you're doing, so Becky, is that when you're just doing regular stocking stitch with the red? So plain red the whole time? Do you keep going round and round? Yeah. So once you've joined in the round, you just keep working around. There isn't any need to do a join again. You just essentially slip your marker and just keep knitting. So that's how you just working in the round. And it's not a dumb question. It should be something I said when I was teaching it. Victoria, do I prefer this method or the German short? You know, I like this. German short rows, I like them too. They can probably look a little bit neater, a little bit like a left and a right lifted increase. I think they're nice looking. I like the wrap and turn because I suppose I'm more familiar with them than I am with the German ones. But the German short rows have they can look very elegant, particularly if you're not the best at picking up your wrap and turns, which can be what makes wrap and turns look quite ugly as a method. So yeah, I like these, but I think it's only because I use them a lot more than I use the German ones. But the German ones are pretty. So yes, right. So the thing here now is that I've wrapped this stitch and I'm ready to work back. So one thing to watch for is it's going to say continue doing the wrap row until you have 12 central stitches remaining unwrapped. So I could go on and do that, but I want to show you how you know which of your stitches are unwrapped. So it's going to be after you do a purl row, because you're going to keep you want to keep them even, so you'll always have worked the same number of stitches on each side before you count how many are unworked. So once you've wrapped this stitch and turned your work, you can now count how many aren't wrapped. So this is wrapped, so I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14 stitches that are unwrapped. So you would know then once you get to 12 of those, you would know that you're ready to move on to the next section. So it is just something to kind of be aware of, is how to count those stitches. Now, I would keep going, but I don't think you want me to do any more short rows. If you do, let me know because I can come back and do them. But short rows are actually, doing the short row itself is very straightforward. Let me just demonstrate a little bit. Let me demonstrate very quickly another set of them. So say I just worked to here, makes no difference. I bring my yarn through the needle, I slip my stitch, I bring it back, I slip it back onto the needle, I bring my yarn back and slip my stitch, and I turn my work. And then I purl the next stitch back along, and then I can wrap and turn on any purl stitch at all. So this one, I bring my yarn, is not need to bring it forward because it's already forward, slip the stitch purlwise, bring the yarn round, slip the stitch back, turn your work, and then bring it back, ready to knit, and then you can knit back. So that again is just to show you the different, and you can actually see that I've worked a lot more of this stitch than I have any of the other stitches, and that's why they're called short rows. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is, the first thing is I'm going to show you how to pick it up, and then I'm going to show you how to pick them up, double wrap them. So this part is not how you would do this bit in the heel, but I'm going to show you how to pick them up first, because it's important to be able to pick up a wrap. And then I'm going to show you how to do the double wrapping for the heel. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how you pick up your wrap so that you don't get a hole. This is not part of the sock. Well, it is, but it's just the technique itself first before we move on. So I've turned my work and I'm knitting along. And what you'll see in a pattern is it'll say work the next row, knit all the stitches, picking up the wraps as you come to them. So I'm on my knit side. So this time I've come to my stitch with my wrap. So the way to pick up a wrap on this side is to take the tip of your needle. I'm going to come nice and close for this so you can see my wrap. I take my needle, I slip it into the front loop of my stitch, so into the front loop of the wrap. I then take my needle around and I slip it into the front loop of the knit stitch, and I knit the two of those together. And you can slide them off separately if you want. And what you're doing with that is you are hiding the wrap at the back of the stitch, so you don't see it at the front of the work. And then you knit on, because I've no more. I'm going to knit now to my next wrap stitch. So these are all plain stitches because they're not wrapped. I just do this and knit, and then I'm going to knit this one. Now I have one more wrapped stitch. So again, I go into the front of the wrap, into the front of the stitch, then I knit the two of those off together and I pull it round, and that means that the wrap is kind of hidden in the stitch. And then I keep going. Oh, I would actually pick this one up as well. And with this one, you can actually see the white yarn goes to the back of the work. So all your wraps are hidden at the back. And then you just knit your last stitch out here. So that is how you pick up your stitches on the wrapped side. So that's how you pick up your knit side stitches. That's actually quite neat. You can't really see them, you don't know, and you can't see any holes, which is what you would get if you knit across without the wraps. So I'm now going to turn, I'm going to show you how to pick up a purl wrap, which is slightly different. So then I purl back across to the first stitch that's been wrapped, because they'll have been on the other side. So now I've worked, any wraps I've worked don't count this time, so I just keep purling over them like they're ordinary stitches, because they are. So even though you can see them here wrapped at the back, they don't matter anymore. They're just regular stitches now, because I've unwrapped them essentially, until I come to the first set of my purl ones, which are here. So let me just make sure this is my first purl wrapped stitch that I'm coming to. So what I want to do with this one, so in my knit stitch I went into the front and the front. In the purl you go into the back side of the stitch, into the purl side of the stitch, and then you purl the two of those together and you bring it through, and that sits the two pieces of the stitch at the back of your stitch so you don't see them. And we're going to do that again here. So this is a regular stitch, and here you go into this side, so it's this side of the, essentially the other side of the work to where you were. It's not this loop, it's this loop on this side. Then you go into the back loop, purl the two of those together and bring them back into the back of your work. Give it a little bit of a pull. And I think, did I wrap this one as well? Yep, so this is wrapped as well. So we go in here, purl those together, bring them round, give them a little tug, and we're going to purl my last stitch, which is just a bit lumpy at this stage. Give that a pull to make it tidier. When you turn it around then, you can't see. It looks a little bit odd, obviously, because you have created like a really random bulging short row, but you can't see the wraps. They just look like regular stitches that are a little bit larger. That's probably a bit loose, but they're turned. Oh, I'm way off screen. Apologies. So I've sorted that out. You can't see the wraps at the front of the stitches. So what I'll do is next time I'll actually show you what they look like when you don't pick them up correctly. So they are your wrapped stitches. Now that's obviously not a correct heel, but that's the technique for picking them up. And that's going to be important in the next piece when I move on to one I have created earlier. So this is part of a heel that I've worked. So I've been working this little bit of a heel. So we're now back to this part where it says, knit to the first wrap stitch in the row and wrap and turn that stitch. So you're doing double wrap. So what I'm going to show you here is how to do a double wrap, which is exactly the same actually as a single wrap. And then I'm going to show you how to pick up a double wrap. And then I'll show you what happens when you don't pick them up correctly. So this time I'm working back now. So I've finished my heel and I know I've worked so many on stitches. It says to work back to my first wrapped stitch. So I work back to my first wrapped stitch. So this is my wrapped stitch. And it says to wrap and turn that stitch. So I'm actually going to wrap and turn that again. So because it's a knit one, bring my yarn through, slip my stitch, bring my yarn back, slip it back to my needle. Now it's double wrapped, turn my work. So you'll see that that wrap is exactly the same as if the stitch wasn't wrapped before. So now it's just doubly wrapped. Then I purl back to my next wrapped stitch, or the first wrapped stitch in the row. You can see that there it's waiting for me. So then I'm here at my wrapped stitch. My yarn is at the front. I slip my stitch, wrap it, slip it back, turn my work, and that is my double wrapped stitch now. So the next instruction is to work to the first double wrapped stitch and work the wrapped stitch with its double wraps, which sounds like a lot, but it's not. So I'm going to work back, and exactly the same way as we did with the single wraps as we saw in the demo. Let me just knit that one as well. I take the tip of my needle and I go into both of my wraps, the front loops of both of my wraps. So the back loops are there and my front loops are here, and then I tip my needle and I go through the stitch at the front, and then I knit the two of those together. Now it can be a little bit tricky, you might want to do it in two maneuvers. And then I pull it back around, and that is what turns that part of the stitch. So the next instruction then is to wrap your next stitch. So again, yarn to the front, slip the stitch, bring it back, slip the stitch back, turn your work. And I'm going to show you how to pick up the double purl wrap on this side now. So it says to purl back to the stitch. So I'm going to purl all the way back. Let me come a little bit closer actually as we do this. So I'm purling back to my first double purl wrapped stitch. So it's this one, so you can see your double wrap. Take my needle, and now this time you might have to do a little bit of reaching around, because it's like, so you have your double wrap and you have to go into the two wrap stitches from the back, so the two back loops into the stitch purlwise. So what I normally do with this is I take off the purl stitch and then I go back and around for my wraps to kind of bring them around, because it can be a bit tricky to catch them all together. So they're my two wraps that I kind of follow my purl stitch off of, and you can see that the two wraps are sitting at the back of the work there. So now I have to wrap my next stitch, slip it purlwise, yarn around, bring the stitch back, turn the work, and you are now ready to knit back again. So let's have a look at what that looks like now, and then I'm going to show you what happens if you don't pick your wraps up correctly. So it's started to turn the heel, and because it's a double wrap, it's quite obvious, but you can actually see the heel taking shape already because that's actually your heel. So that's what the double wraps look like. They're there to make sure there's no holes, and it really secures your heel. I have seen heels where you pick up your wraps and it's just single wraps. It doesn't turn correctly. Well, it doesn't turn the way I like it. It's not that it's not correct. So that is the first thing. So let me just let me see, does anyone have any questions around that, or is there anything you'd like to see? Because that's a lot in 25 minutes, I think, for everybody to absorb, because short rows are a very particular type of skill. They're a very particular type of technique, but this should get you through the heel part of this. It's enough. There's loads of magical things you can do with heels. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to show you what happens if you don't pick them up correctly and what you might see if you miss them. So say, for example, I am going along and I come to my double wrap and I forget about my wraps and I knit on. That's what you're going to see. So you'll see, let me go right up close. So if you don't pick up your wraps, you get holes. Then I'm going to slip those back. And if you pick them up, so say I pick them up, it's actually when you know how to pick this. So say I pick them up like this. I pick them up through the back loops. You'll actually see the wraps at the front. And that's what you're trying to avoid all the time with wraps and turns. So this is a single wrap stitch. If I pick it up through the back like that, you get a wrap at the front. And you're trying to avoid that. That's the whole idea of the way you pick up the stitches correctly. So in this one, with the purls, even if it was or the knit stitch, into the front, lift it up, take it to the back and hide it. So you can see the difference between those as I knit them together. They hide the stitch wraps. Whereas on this side, you can see the wraps at the fronts of the stitches because I haven't picked them up correctly. And if you don't pick them up like that, you would get a hole as well. So that is really the short rows. So they are wrap and turn short rows, and they look a little bit mangled because they're not, you have to work back and forth all the way, but it would take a little bit too long, I imagine, for that kind of demo. So if you have any questions, I'm going to swap back cameras now. And then, so let me just actually show you with the pattern. So down here, you are going to work to your last double wrap it, then you're going to wrap and turn your final stitch, and you're going to do the same here. So when you're working back the next time, you're going to have one single wrap to pick up, and that's just something to note for when you are on this piece. Before you come to do your leg, you are going to pick up your double wraps and your single wraps, and then you're going to replace your marker. And then you're going to do, for your foot, which is something we were talking about, you do 26 rounds of stocking stitch. So something that's really nice about a short row heel, so for example, when you've done your short row heel, you join back around and it'll tell you when to change to your main yarn, and you just knit your foot. Whereas if you were doing a short, let me reach in, where is it gone? This one. Whereas if I had just turned my heel here, I would have to pick up a gusset and I would have to do a little bit of shaping. Whereas with the short row heel, you just go around the corner and you're done. So I'm going to swap across now and give people a little chance to ask any questions. Right, so that is heels in 25 minutes. So it is quite a whistle-stop tour, but do give it a go. And it's something, if you are practicing on your sock, because obviously you've come a long way, I would suggest maybe casting on a small number of stitches. Like I have 40 there on a 3.25 with a double knitting yarn. Cast on as few stitches as you can to get them into the round and practice. And actually you don't have to do it in the round. You could just cast on 20 stitches as if you were just doing the heel flap part of it, and then practice on those. So it might be a good idea, if you haven't done wrap and turns before, to cast on, actually yes, let me do that. So cast on your 20 stitches and practice on those before you kind of have a go as a heel, because it's a technique in its own right. So it's not just about the heel, it's learning how to pick them up and stuff like that as well. So that is wrap and turn heels. Does anyone have any questions about that? I'll have a little bit of a... Yeah, I think, Victoria, a lot of people, the picking up of the wraps is the issue. Hopefully that has worked. And yeah, it is what, Debbie, once you do see them, once it's done, you're like, oh, okay. And then you can see that it's actually kind of difficult to go back and get them incorrect. Although, trust me, I have definitely gone, oh, pick those up the wrong way around. Chris, yes. I'm so glad, Chris, actually. Oh, I was going to show something actually for you, Chris. Apologies, I've forgotten. Let me just rip out this heel. It's something that a lot of people suffer from, actually. So what happens is that sometimes you find yourself, and your work has just become, you find yourself that you're working on the outside of your sock and you're getting the inside outside. All you have to do is just flip it around and then just work the other way. What happens is it's because of the way you hold your needles, and it can be that your thumbs can drive your yarn through and you're working fine because it makes sense that you're just working this way. But it's just that sometimes the fabric gets reversed. And it happens to lots of people. It was something I didn't understand why it happened first. I was like, why is that? Because it wasn't something I had done myself, but it's really, really common. Yes, it is. And you know what? It's the purl ones are a bit tricky to pick up, because I think the knit ones make sense, but it can be very easy to purl the loop that's on the working side of the work towards you and picking those up, and that's mostly why you go a little bit wrong with the purl ones, because you can definitely see the wrap and those a lot sooner. The knit ones make sense, the purl side make less sense, I think, when you're picking up those purl wraps, Helen, so you're not wrong. They're a little bit more fiddly, a little bit when they're trying to purl through the back loop. They're a bit like that. Bit fiddly. So that's it, my dears. If anyone has any questions later on, do tag me. So tonight, if you can, get to your toes. And a really interesting thing about the toes as well is if you are starting them and you're used to knitting socks, they are 90 degrees differently positioned to where you knit. Let me show you actually. So because this is a decorative sock and I want it to lie against a wall, this toe is fine on a decorative sock. So it's designed to sit like that. However, on your foot, if I hang it sideways, you'll actually see that the shaping runs along the toe where your actual toe would be. So it's like this in the decorative sock because it opens it up, but it's like this in a real sock that you would wear. So it's just to be something to be aware of. Yeah, because if it's yeah, in case you start your toe tonight, just be aware that it's not positioned the same as if you were knitting a regular sock. And no, Chris, you are not alone in that. I think the really great thing about knitting is that if you can make a mistake, someone else has definitely made it. And then and how you rejoin for the foot. So Heidi, with the rejoining for the foot, actually, I've made it as straightforward as possible. So when you go down, you will see where it says you've knit the 2 stitches together. When you wrap that, you actually start working with your main coloured yarn. And that's why it's not the most beautiful join in the world, but it is a lot easier to pick up and start working with the dark yarn. So give it a go, but when you come to that last line in the pattern, it'll actually tell you when to start using your main yarn again. And that's why those 2 stitches are knit together, to make it kind of easier to know when to change. So that's it, my dears. Thank you very much, and I will see you all for toes tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Have a lovely evening.